Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. This is Tim Winnicky with Empowered Change, Counseling and Education. And in our 13th episode, we were really lucky to get Chris Griffin on board. Chris and I know each other through a podcaster support network, primarily designed to help us come up with content and make these podcasts as good as we possibly can for you. And what better way than to bring on a fantastic guest like Chris? We had an absolute blast. I laughed more in this interview than I probably have in any of the others, despite the fact that we got into a little bit of dark topics here and there. You're going to notice that there's going to be a break. At one point in the podcast, Chris started to open the can a little bit on some of his experience as a young Catholic going to become a Buddhist after all of the news came out about the church and its hurting of children. We decided that that wasn't going to be the best way to cover it at the end with just a few minutes. We may have Chris back on to talk about that later, but most of what this one's going to be about is his journey as an entrepreneur, as a man, and how he got into counseling later in life. He also spends a good amount of time giving us some solid basis on cognitive behavior therapy and mindfulness. Again, we're really lucky to get Chris. I had an absolute blast, and I can't wait to meet up with him next week to go talk about mindfulness on his podcast, Mindful Matters. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Hey, Chris, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Tim. It's great to be on.
Yeah, man. So I know you based on our relationship in the podcasting support group and listening to some of yours. Can you tell the folks that are listening a little bit about what you do now?
I am currently a licensed professional counselor in Connecticut. I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years now in different capacities, starting at, clinic level, obviously building up to getting my licensure and starting my own private practice about 2.5, 3 years ago, which has now, thank you. Which has already evolved into a small group practice called Griffin Counseling Services, servicing like the greater Hartford area in Connecticut.
Well, you must be doing something right if you convinced a bunch of people to jump ship and join you.
Right. Well, luring people away from a clinic these days is not that difficult, unfortunately. Working conditions are tough out there sometimes.
Yeah, I was actually I was just talking to Dwayne that's in our podcasting group about that and some of the struggles between moving from like clinical to small practice to group practice and how everything's a little wonky that way.
It seemed for me it was kind of natural, only because I had done other things business-like earlier in my life. So that part of it never bothered me. I thought it would, actually doing books and, like kind of, the mundane work of doing, but I actually kind of enjoy it so that I can do it and other people will basically, give me a portion of what they're making to do it. It's also survival technique too, right? How many people can we see in a week, right? Let's spin the wheel. Like how high can I get my census in a week before I start to snap?
Yeah, there is a diminishing returns on sanity for money when all you're doing is the clinical practice. What I find that if I'm not working with the clients I like the guys, the veterans and the responders, that number dwindles. What are the clients that kind of keep you refreshed for your clinical work?
So my primary work revolves around mindfulness now, training, teaching. So still clinical and still working with, diagnosed patients, clients, but also doing more of the coaching and the teaching really that is involved in mindfulness and getting people to, a place where they feel comfortable practicing mindfulness.
Well, so that's solid, man. You're probably one of the first people I've had on that move between clinical and coaching. Can you, just for the listeners and even for me, right? I'm always a little sideways on where that line lands. Can you distinct those two services for me?
So if you're talking to me and you're coming to me, you're always getting the coach, right? Like doesn't matter if you're coming to me for a diagnosed disorder or if you are coming to me because you're struggling with your relationship.
Okay.
I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear you. And part of what I'm going to do is help you find simple, not easy, but simple ways to go after whatever it is that you're setting as your simplified or smart goals. I love that, the term smart goals. And going at it from that angle. So you're always going to get that coach from me, but the therapist in me, right, is also kind of able to empathize and go with the moment of somebody struggling or somebody melting down in panic mode or having a flashback. And you can't be a coach and really work with those things very well. You have to be well clinically trained therapist to be able to handle those situations that would make most people in their regular daily lives kind of melt. So you have to have both. And if I was to distinguish it from a business perspective, really coaching is I'm not diagnosing you.
Okay.
In my mind, really.
Well, I think that matches up pretty well with what I usually frame out the work for. So I'm very directive on the front end of therapy because I'm almost only working with guys and responders and vets. And guys, as a rule, we don't come in to seek help until our world's on fire. And
you're doing a lot of triage there.
Yeah. And so then it's, I'm really depressed. I've got all this anxiety. I feel like I have no control. Give me things to do that are going to let me feel like I can have some control back. And so for me, it's funny the way that when someone says they're a coach, what I hear is very directive. Like you are guiding them through very specific, and I like how you said simple but not easy directives. And for me, the therapist doesn't come out until those directives are met.
No, that can't be true. That can't be 100% true because anybody who comes into your office and meets you and comes back is not just coming back because you gave them simple things to do. They're coming back because there's something about you that distinguish you as somebody that can help them.
Well, and that's just it, right? So for me, it's that when I think of coach, I think back to like Little League and getting barked at for where my hand was on the field when I'm trying to take line, right? That's not a therapeutic role. But for me, it's when we get into that story of people, right? Like, okay, so now you've got the volume turned down enough. You can really take a look at what's going on. You can figure out what you want in life. You can figure out who you want to bring with you for what you're shooting for. And all of a sudden, I can't direct the traffic on that, right? I can tell somebody how to calm down from a panic attack. I can tell somebody how to have sleep hygiene. I can tell somebody different resources to fight depression. But once they're stable, then they've got that really big weight of decision.
I run into a lot of, fear of failure, fear of success.
Yeah.
Right at that moment where they've recovered, they've really put things together. Now they're like, I have to keep it at that same level. Right. And there's a pressure to that, that sometimes that's why people will relapse because that the weight of, but if I succeed, I have to maintain that level can be a lot of pressure, especially if you're highly anxious or you've just recently failed in something like gotten fired from a job or, had a relationship breakup or, so, that's, I think, basically, well, let me back up one piece. I am a very thoroughly trained CBT therapist. Yeah. So I went into school and I thought I was going to be so humanistic. And I was going to change my voice to sound more like this.
Do everything you could to emulate Carl Rogers, right?
Right, exactly. I was just going to be so Rogerian that people were going to model themselves on my Rogerianism. So when I went to school, I got this amazing opportunity to do my internship at Yale, at the Yale School of Medicine, with some of
Nice.
the leading addiction medicine docs and professors.
Yeah, no good clinicians at Yale for sure.
Yeah, in the world, right? So these guys were like world class. And so when I got there, what they were doing is I was doing research protocols at a methadone clinic. We were perched above the methadone clinic in our little research unit there. And they're like, okay, here, we're going to train you how to do behavioral activation according to research, right? So 15, bing, 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 bing. You deflect, deflect, deflect. We're not talking about your mom. We're not talking about what's going on in your daily life. We're talking about CBT, scheduling, simple things to do. And these are most of them that I was working with in this protocol were receiving Suboxone or, an opioid replacement. So they had their physical addiction taken care of. What they were testing to see was to see if CBT as an added would help them to maintain sobriety and not, relapse. And, I don't even think I've ever seen the results of it because it takes so long for stuff to get published. But
well, my guess is that it at some point was because CBT is one of the few things that the VA looks for and that state Medicaid looks for addiction treatment. So whatever data they got.
Right. Well, and the initial data out of wherever it was, University of Washington, or when they were, they put it CBT head to head with like Prozac, and like it was right up there. It could, and the long-term results showed that people with CBT actually relapse less than the people on Prozac, right? So it's like, that is powerful, right? That is really powerful. So again, I love CBT. I'm very into like, yes, we can do something about this, and not kind of just the passive, Rogerian. But guess what? You know why they come back? Because you're a Rogerian, not because you're a CBT therapist.
Right.
Any robot could sit there, and they're programming them as we speak, right?
Oh yeah. We're all getting replaced.
Yeah. They are programming the CBT bots right now to replace that part of what we do. So, but we also know that like 75% of outcome depends on the relationship you have with the person that you're engaging in this thing with, whether it's coaching or therapy or having a good friend, whatever, right? Like 74% of it is
like modeling relationship.
Exactly, right. And being, right, I said this to someone the other day, haven't you like reparented someone 20 years older than you, right? Haven't you, rechilded someone who maybe like the same age as you or young, you know what I mean? Like,
well, real quick, I want to make sure. So you and I can speak in acronyms all day. Can CBT is cognitive behavior therapy for the listeners, and basically what that frame of therapy is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I started with CBT too. It made a lot of sense from that dude logic mind. How you think about something changes how you feel and what you do. So if you can change the thoughts, you can change all the rest of it.
Right. Or if you can change the behavior, right? So there's the behaviorists and the cognitivists, right? They came together, right? And they formed CBT, but in the beginning, all the behaviorists, all the Skinnerians, right, were like, that's B.F. Skinner, people. Look it up. He's very, very important. If you don't know who you should. So like he did all the experiments on rats and he proved that, basically we're just, we're all going after the
cheese,
right? And his work is very effective and makes a ton of sense. So what they're saying is change the behavior. So that's what behavioral activation is about, is I'm going to ask you to, you've been isolated now for 3 months with depression. I'm going to ask you to go out and do something like social, but that to that person, that might mean taking a walk around the neighborhood, right? Like your average person would think, they're going to go to like, some kind of a function or something. Like, no, right? Like, so in CBT, it's also little steps like that. And it's very scheduled, right? So we are also modifying behavior, and we are also modifying thinking, cognitions by, working with people's negativity bias. The brain has a negativity bias because it's scanning for safety most of the time. And so it's looking for threats. So you would know this, if anybody would know this. Like you have people with hyper stimulated like amygdalas and response systems because they've been in combat, in dangerous situations. So their brains
Or
are
just
on
walking around a city.
fire. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if our brain already has a negativity bias and then we're put in traumatic or negative situations on top of that, right? So our brains are always thinking the worst is going to happen. And mindfulness, let me tie this
Here
in
we
real
go.
quick, right? Mindfulness can
Yeah.
help us stay right here as opposed to being back there where that awful thing happened or around the corner where that thing is possibly lurking.
Mm-hmm.
We can begin to feel safe and trust ourselves again by it just feels good to be like right here in this moment,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's where so I do dialectic behavior therapy as my main modality, which has that nice, combo of the CBT and the mindfulness.
I'm a big fan.
Oh yeah, and I think what I love, the reason I picked that therapy is it's what worked for me. Right, for me, what I loved about DBT is it took all of these fairly high end concepts, broke it down into really simple tools that are less than 2-syllable words, and made it so that I learned what I needed to learn in kindergarten. Right.
That's what DBT is. It's
Yeah.
just whatever you missed out on because of whatever reason, because
Yeah.
and it could just be the most benign reasons too. Like,
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah. This
know,
doesn't have to be like, oh, I was horribly traumatized.
exactly. I mean, it works for that too.
Yeah.
But what I tell most people is you could bring in anybody off the street. I could give them some DBT skills and they'd walk away a better person for it.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it sounds like, though, what's really called to you, like you like the CBT work, you like how effective it is, but what's really called to you is more the mindfulness work. And that's why you've developed a practice around that. How did you make that jump?
Because it worked for me. Right.
Funny story, right?
I'm gonna echo you, right?
Yeah.
Because when I went to therapy for the first time, one of the first things he did was teach me how to breathe. And he gave me John Kabat-Zinn's book to read,
Mhm.
Full Catastrophe Living. And I read that and I was having panic attacks and, it basically helped to cure me. And it was
Mhm.
funny though, because I got off it for a while.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't have that problem anymore. So I don't need to do that.
This. Yeah.
That was a big mistake. Fine. I'm glad I made it though, because I have clients that make it all the time. So I'm like, totally, I get it. Right. I
Yeah.
totally get it. So, fast forward, whatever, like 18 years later, and I'm working in a clinical setting. After basically 3 years in school, I'd never taken my undergrad, was not in psychology. I'd never taken a psychology course. And here I am in a clinical master's program. And, it got a little heavy, And so as I'm in this clinic and as it's getting heavy, and as I'm asking, please stop giving me so many patients because I feel like I'm going to like fold into myself. I remembered like, oh, wait, breathing. Oh, wait, you know what I'm doing? This is the craziest part, probably. I was running mindfulness groups. Okay. I was running mindfulness groups and
not doing it.
exact. And nobody was. And nobody, that's what I kind of pointed out to the whole place was that, you know what, like we're preaching to these, patients that mindfulness is going to help them, to recover from their eating disorder. And we're all little stress balls in our offices trying to avoid, like I'm saying, implosion.
Yeah.
And so I bought in whole hog. And what helped me with that was Andy Putticombe and Headspace.
Headspace is great.
Headspace was, for me was the thing that really got me to do it and, fight through the initial, it's difficult. It's not easy to, now I'm talking less about mindfulness and more about formal meditation, which is a piece of mindfulness. And I think it's pretty essential to it, but there's many routes to that. So that's another thing I teach, right? Like you wouldn't know if you were trying to teach yourself mindfulness that there's like a bunch of ways to get to having a formal practice of meditation. Most people just think of it as, one thing.
Yeah, it's funny. So I have yet to have a good experience meditating. Right? That's my stuff. My mind just continues to press forward too fast. But the way I frame out mindfulness is at its most basic point of finding neutral. And that's, if somebody needs more than that, I'm very likely to refer to somebody like you, right? Like I've got a buddy Tom in Denver that at some point I'm gonna get on here, and the guy, like, you calm down being in the room with him. You know that guy? That's Tom.
Mhm.
Like,
That energy, it's a very specific energy.
yeah, just getting lunch with him. My day is just, the volume gets turned down, right? Uh, so one of the things I wanted to pick up on is you said 18 years ago is when these panic attacks and these real big struggles were happening. And one of the reasons why I was immediately drawn to you was that I think we share a fairly similar background of coming to clinical work halfway through, right? Like I didn't even start my graduate program until I was 33. So here I am, getting the business started and everything at 38. It sounds like it's been a fairly similar trajectory to you.
Yeah, the numbers are actually pretty close.
Yeah. What did you do before you did this?
So, um, before I did anything, so I graduated from Connecticut College, and I have a passion for music. So if I had any kind of a decent camera right now, I could pan around and you could see my beautiful instruments. And this is a little studio I have in my basement. So that's what I did. I started a recording studio with assistance from a couple of friends and some financing from my daddy. Right,
Yeah.
I was able to. He had a couple old garage condominium spaces, and I said to him, I was like, you're not even using, one of them's full of like junk. Like, why don't we clean it out and renovate it? He had a construction company, renovate it, and I'm going to be a producer.
There you go.
Okay.
He's like, sure, it doesn't cost me anything. Fine, fix it.
Yeah, he's like, for him, it was pretty awesome. He was psyched. It was like a big tax write-off. I could tell you how much of a child of privilege I am, but that's the boring story.
I think less boring than you think, but
so that's where I started out. And so I had my own business. It was awesome. Like, it was such a good learning experience. I learned a ton about music industry. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened is, like, right when I got all this crazy nice equipment, like 2 years later, you could do the same thing on a laptop.
yeah, so you got in right before it all went away.
And so what I had to offer was my expertise on, I know how to make things sound good or sound like something else or sound like something totally different. I had a studio full of really, high-end instruments that people could use. So when they were coming in, they could use my stuff instead of their old, stuff that they bought at like a dime store. So that was where I started. That was like 4 to 5 years. Kind of like just did nothing, worked for my dad for a little while. He's in construction. I just worked in his office. And one day he just said, oh, you know what? They're looking for court reporters. I was like, well, I'm not going to learn steno, Dad. That's like, I got to go back to school for that. That takes a long time.
Yeah.
He's like, no. It's this thing called voice reporting. And you just repeat what they're saying in the hearing, and then you type up the transcript. And he's like, they're desperate for these people. They have none of them. And I was like, oh, because there's no more stenographers, because it's too hard to learn stenography. I won't get into a stenography discussion, but I work with a lot of them and it's really hard. So from there, I took like an online course. I became a stenographer, but voice reporter. I got a job. So I'm originally from the Boston area. I got a job with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a voice reporter.
Okay.
So I had a state job. Like a lot of people were like, you made it.
Yeah.
You have employment for life and benefits.
Yeah.
And just was dying inside most of the time.
Yeah. That sounds like a pretty crushing, be a pretty crushing job depending on who you are.
So there's a lot of ironies, or I don't know if they're ironies or not, but it's very peculiar, right? So a guy who loves to talk, loves to interact with people.
That's what I was just thinking.
And I repeat, no original thoughts, just repeating what they're saying into a mask, and no one can even like hear me. And my job was to not be seen in the courtroom, right? No one should know
Oh
that
my
the
God.
court reporter's there. So I was like, but I was wearing like flamboyant suits and stuff though. So I was like, "No, you won't like,
You will acknowledge my
yeah, you will
existence.
see." So I will wear like Men's Express, like,
Uh,
so I did that for, 8 years. And so
you did that 8 years?
so
I am
when people are like,
stunned.
"Oh, that's going to take a year," I'm like, "So what?"
Well, I'm just picturing like the guy that's in front of me now, who is this, loud, boisterous, high energy guy standing in the back of the courtroom, quietly whispering into a mask, and imagining you doing that for 8 years. How did you
It was
make it 8 years through that?
because like the pay was decent, right? I mean, I had really good benefits. I had, a wife who was in school, and
Mhm.
so I wanted to support her. And that's a different story because now she's like uber successful, and like I helped her to get to that.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, it was just I had to decide too, what did I want to do? Like I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I did what any intelligent person does. I went to a therapist.
I'll
um,
take that.
right, and I went. It's so funny because I went for a totally different reason,
Mhm.
and he was like, "You're miserable at your job." I was like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "Well, you got to figure out what you want to do." So I like thought it over for a couple of weeks, and I came back into his office and like, "Oh, I want to do what you do." And he was like, like literally, he was like this. He was an older gentleman.
Yeah.
It was in Newton, Massachusetts, and so he was this like old professorial kind of guy operating out of the nice basement of his house, but nonetheless the basement of his house. And he was just like, "Oy vey."
Uh-huh.
And so let's tie this back in. Let me put a little ribbon on this for
There
you,
you go,
right?
man.
So he starts to tell me, "No, there's a thing called coaching, and you'd be better suited to be a coach because you um, are more proactive, right? You're more directive in your approach with people." So he's like, "You are not going to be able to sit there for 10 years and listen to somebody's same problems over and over again." He's like, "That's going to drive you crazy." So what he didn't know at that time, and this is the same guy who turned me on to John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness. He didn't seem to know anything about CBT at the time, right? So
Okay.
when I then heard there were these different modalities of therapy that were directive, but still involved the essentials of being, therapeutic, like then
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, so anyway, okay." So from there, I had to wait a couple of years because we were moving. My wife was starting her career.
Mhm.
So we moved from Boston area to the Hartford area
Mhm.
for her career.
Mhm.
And that's when I finally could go back to school. So this whole time I'm working that job because I
It's her turn.
know, yeah, and exactly. And so now then she's working. Now it's my turn,
Mhm.
right, to go back to school. And um, so I have 2 master's degrees. I went and got a master's degree in organizational psychology so I could get into the clinical program
Mhm.
because I had no psychology background. So
They
I
made you go
just
get an entirely separate master's?
no, I just did that
Okay.
because I was like, what else am I going to do? What else, how else am I going to get into a clinical psychology program with no psychology
Yeah.
background? No, I hadn't been in college in 20 years or whatever it
Yeah.
was. So,
Yeah, that was a jar, man. I remember coming back after 15 years of not reading an academic book and being like, here we go.
right. And so I actually, after working with that guy with Gene, um, decided, okay, I'm going to be one iteration of a coach or therapist or whatever. And so I was looking at coaching, but once I saw that there was CBT and DBT, then I said, "Oh, okay, I can do this and still, be that, coaching type of person that I want to be." And so the rest is, schooling and internships and, the like.
Well, it sounds like as kind of rough as that work environment was for you, it sounds like it did something that was really important for you. It allowed you to get out from under your father. as much as I'm sure you cared about him, he sounds like he was a pretty supportive guy overall.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It is at some point important to kind of leave the family nest or join what they're building. And then your wife needed you. You needed to be the provider to get her and you to the life you wanted.
And that was okay with me. I was,
Yeah.
I had gotten to a point where that was okay with me. And what I really had to come around to, though, at the end of the day, so that I could be a therapist and like work with people's deepest, darkest secrets and desires and shames and loves and all that stuff, was, just to realize that being who I was something that was marketable, right? That,
Yeah.
that right at the end of the day, people are always like, "Oh, you're so pleasant. You have such a nice personality. You really get people." And it's like, well, it's gotten me nowhere. But then when I decided where to channel it, and then I set like, everybody always told me, "Oh, like if you ever applied yourself, right?" I heard every single one of those things my whole life, but they were right, because when I did and I found my thing, just like when I was doing music, I was whole hog into that. I mean, I was 110% behind that. When I finally found this, when I found, this career, and then realized that I could do multiple things that keep my interests, like podcasts
Yeah.
and doing talks and groups and
Well, and
running
mentoring
a
other
business.
people. Yeah, being like that's the other thing that's always interesting about coming to this work later in life. Like, us in our 30s with our life experience, we don't maybe have the clinical background, but me being a sergeant, like I can do organization, I can guide people, I can teach people, I can do all those other aspects. I'm far more than just someone who is good at sitting alone in a room with somebody suffering.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the critical things that people who get into this field and have a hard time or burn out really quickly, it's because they're really empathetic and they have that angle. But you have to also be a business person. That's why
Yeah.
I don't care if you're an energy healer. I work with several energy healers, and they also need to be business people.
Yeah.
They can't just, or join a practice, right?
Yeah. Work for someone.
Right, or
That's the
someone like
thing.
me is
Yeah.
willing to, like, do the grunt work, or have someone, I have a great assistant and manager who helps me to run my practice. So it's out there. It's out there for the taking, so to speak.
Well, it sounds like you and I really meet the statistic, right? Like, I think the last time I looked, the average 35-year-old had gone through 7 different careers, not jobs, right? Like whole heart new careers.
And
Sounds
I
about
think
right.
it does. I think that is close to the statistic. Right? Might be an onion statistic. I don't know, but it's still a statistic. We're gonna
Yeah,
use
right, right.
it. I'll go with it. Because
But
I
you
think
listed just 4 in like 20 minutes.
right, right. And one of the things too, and a lot of the young adults I work with now express this a lot, and I'm totally with this. Is, are you really the same person when you're 43 as when you were 23? Right? Like,
Hope not.
would the same job be, right, as
Yeah.
applicable? So
Mhm.
the job that I had for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was a great job, right? It seemed like, to a lot of people, that would be the holy grail of kind of, security. But
Yeah.
I was willing to sacrifice that security once my wife had it. See, I helped her to gain security for the both of us, right? So that
Mhm.
I could move into something where I could take a chance.
Yeah, you had to support her while you both build the security that you could then launch to the next thing.
Exactly. And so I'm still in the midst of that, which is really cool. So I'm still just, you know, uh, kind of a rookie at this. And you were so right before when you said, being in the clinic and having, that experience too, although at times was difficult, and some of the other difficulties I went through, but right, it solidified my mindfulness practice. I had amazing supervisors and mentors in
Yeah.
those places that gave me confidence in myself, which I was severely lacking. Right, you can tell, right? Can you tell I totally lack in confidence? Like,
It's-
right. So that's why I say to people, like, okay, this did not happen overnight,
Right.
Some of this is natural, right? Some of this is being raised really well too and having good genes. But when I decided to embrace who I was finally, I mean, I think that's like the second time I've said that, but
Yeah.
found out who I was authentically. And again, you need some wisdom for that and some experience. Tie that back into, yeah, there's some certain things about a later in life career changer
Hmm.
that is going to be really valuable to either the person themselves if they decide to become self-employed, or right, to be a better asset to an employer, right?
Yeah, I think one of the best things I ever heard was I was taking a career counseling course, and we had one of the guys who I still work with. He's a great career counselor. He's now running all the programming for the university. And what he said is most of the old career counseling theories have faded out because industry is being revolutionized every 3 years. And you never know what jobs are going to go, what jobs are going to stay, what new careers are going to happen. And the only way to cope with that as an individual moving through your life is figuring out the different ways you can leverage the skills that you've gained along the way. Right?
And I think, do you do a lot of career
I
counseling?
do. I
Okay,
do.
so I have to do it as part of what I do, and
Yeah.
like so, you're almost always, you know,
Well,
employment
the
is
idea of
essential,
American masculinity and the job we have, they're a little tied, right?
right? It's got to be one of the biggest identity identifiers.
Right.
What's the first thing you ask someone when you meet them? Like, what do you
Yeah.
do?
What do you
You
do?
know?
Well, and
Um,
that's also very white collar. It's funny. I was just
yeah, yeah.
listening to Hidden Brain, and they talked about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were saying that for most blue collar folks anymore, they're not identifying as their job anymore, and to the point where they get annoyed at that question. They're like, "I'm a father, a guy who lives in Kentucky. I'm all these things. This is how I get my money."
Right. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that response
yeah,
actually. So yes, but to speak to that point, right?
yeah.
When you're, when you're doing the career counseling, I mean, one of my focus with people is kind of to think outside of what, not, I don't want to say think outside the box because that's like a tired cliche. It's more about you think you know who you are, but you probably don't. And so the employment that you're seeking
Hmm.
is probably not the employment that you're thinking that you would be best at or best for you. Right.
Yeah.
Part of it is like still, you still need to do that piece of self discovery, even when, or especially when you're doing the career counseling, angle.
Well, and there's just a movement of needs, right? For a 20 something person who doesn't have family support, they need money, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they need safety, security, and food. And any job that's going to get them that is what they're going to do. And then if they're a competent adult and if they've got a work ethic and if they've got a skill set, at some point, they're going to move past that basic subsistence. And that's usually when I see my clients that are doing okay. It's not that they're not working, it's not that they're not stable, it's that things are stable, things are safe, I've got food, my family's okay. Why do I hate my job? And then it's time to figure out what skills they got there, what are the important roles that they want to be like what do they want to be identified as? Is that job worth the money to be the provider that they are to their family? And if so, how can they spend their mindful time with the things they like?
Right. As I think when it gets down to it, right, like that self-employment, in my mind anyway, is the American dream.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's probably because, like, although I, was raised with some privilege, my dad was a self-made man. He was, he founded
He built his
a
company
company
and
and he
worked it.
built it up, and he was great at what he did. So to me, growing up, I was always like, oh, that's what you
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
That's what you do. But so many people don't get that. So many people don't have that model. They have a model of somebody who, works for somebody else. But
Mhm.
now I think, especially with some of the changes in, technology, that we're seeing more like I don't know, I'm going to use like a Silicon Valley term, like the
Uh-oh.
gig economy, right?
Yeah.
Right. Uber drivers and the like.
Yeah.
And that, so now these kids are being programmed, not even with that self-employment, but that doing whatever I can to make money, as long as it doesn't bother me all that much, is okay.
Yeah.
And
Give
so
me a
that,
task, pay
right.
me
And
for the
so
task.
that's what we did for
Mhm.
5, 6, careers. They're talking about, right, micro version of that, where
Yeah.
they're just going to kind of, you know, hustle and hustle. And then hopefully when they're ready and their brain's fully developed, they can find, right, they can find something um, that satiates them for a while. I totally agree. Like 8 years in the courtroom, I was like ready to put my head through the bench. It was
Yeah.
just, I don't
Well,
know
at
how
least it gave
anybody
you good
does that.
active listening skills.
Ah, and everyone's like, "Oh, it must have been exciting. You must have seen some like great." And it's like, yeah, I did like
Courtrooms are
3
really
murder
boring.
trials, 3 high profile murder trials in like 8 years, and the
Yeah.
rest was Dimebag Joe coming back for the 5th time because they found, like $10 worth of drugs on him. And it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
So you're just seeing like society at its worst. You're seeing, the people who are struggling the most being punished by people who don't really care if these people are doing these things. They're just,
Yeah.
instituting laws that don't make any sense. So yeah, it was a good 8 years.
Yeah. My 6 years of advocacy, if I learned anything about being in a courtroom, is that it's incredibly boring unless it's landing on you. Like,
Right? It's hurry up and wait. That was our motto.
yeah. So I want to pivot here because I think you and I could probably talk about entrepreneurship and like the progression of career all day, but there's something that when we were just chatting before that I really like, it resonated with me. So the guy you're describing on air right now is this musician who is a provider but is a bigger personality that cares. And the kid that you described to me as a teenager was a hockey player who liked to hit people.
So some of that was tempered by the fact that my dad gave me a drum kit when I was 13 or 14. So that was also a good way to take
That
out
was
some
that
of
was a
that.
better thing than hitting people. Smack a
It
drum.
was, uh, so I'm a huge Lars Ulrich fan. I'm like a huge Metallica fan.
Yeah,
My musical tastes are all over the map these days, but when I was that age, I was angry. I
all
was listening
Metallica
to
all day.
Metallica. I was learning how to play, one on the drums with that double bass.
Yeah,
That's like one of the first times I ever heard a kick drum, and I
yeah,
fell in love with that. So I had that, and I had hockey, and I had all these excellent ways of um, getting my aggression out, getting my anger out, because when I was listening to Metallica and playing the drums, it was like the more fired up and angry I got, like the better I played in some ways. The more emotional, let's just say the more emotional I got, the better I played.
yeah. There's a reason why we don't listen to computer generated music because it's
Right.
more capable, right? It's a math equation.
And so I had that outlet. So along with hitting people, I like to hit the skins. So yeah, I played a lot of hockey from the time that I was very young. And really, so I wasn't necessarily the fastest or had the hardest shot, but I was a defenseman and I had really great leverage. I could nail people. Really, it was like
Yeah,
my primary skill was that I was a big, tough, stay-at-home defenseman. If anybody knows anything about hockey,
yeah. You're the
um,
guy that hits them when they try to score.
yeah. So
It's a great job.
and I relished in it, and I'm a pretty decent sized guy.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, I was getting thrown around a lot. So that was really, I joke about the drums because that's how I got into music, but, um, it was my outlet for everything. So when I was off the ice, I always had a smile on my face. I was the most compliant, serene, kind of just stick to it kid that you could ever meet. I never caused a problem. Like when I did cause a problem, it was like everyone was like, "What?"
What the hell happened? Yeah.
um, and I say, quiet kid, good kid. I see a lot of them in my office. Why? Because
Yeah.
we never learned to get our needs met. But that's okay. That's just probably a conversation for another day, right?
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Well, I was learning to get a need met, right?
Yeah.
So I was also raised Catholic. There's another entire podcast.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
right. And so I was always told, like, the anger is like the devil, and kind of like,
Until you're on
so
the ice or until you're playing a sport, then
right,
just
then it's okay.
get
Then
angry, cut it
tear that
loose.
kid's head off, right?
Right, right. Little mixed
And
messaging.
so, and the thing is, like, I was good at it, and I really liked it too.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, why wouldn't you like
so
something you're good at?
and my dad coached me. He was an excellent coach. He wasn't one of these a-hole,
Well, and I'm sure with all, like, if he was if he was a business guy that was working his own business, that was probably some of the only time that you and
that
him
was the
really
only time. Yeah.
paying
Yeah.
attention.
Exactly. Unless we were on vacation. Yeah, that was really the only time I saw him. And
So you got a lot of reasons to really lean into that role.
exactly. And so, that was primarily how I got my anger out. And when I stopped playing in college, so I went to Connecticut College, and I was recruited to play as D3, and I got there, and I was done with it. So I had broken my collarbone and been knocked unconscious in my last high school game of my career.
That's a hard way to go out.
Right. And I still love the sport, and I ended up playing, later in men's league and stuff like that, but I just couldn't do it anymore. They all, like, first day of college, they were all like, "We're going for a run." I was like, "I'm staying here." And I kind of was like done with hockey at that point.
Well, and it sounds like that was at the point where your father wasn't with you with it anymore.
Right. Yeah. So I was in high school, and, it had been a long 4 years, because we weren't very good.
Yeah, that's hard.
So it was, it's just tough. And I was never on really many good teams, but I also credit that with becoming like a really, like, great loser. I'm like
Yeah,
a really,
there's
I'm
some
like
resilience.
I'm like such a good sport. I'm very resilient.
Yeah, me too. My Pee Wee football team that I played on, I played with them for 4 years before high school. We never won a single game until our last homecoming bowl, and the only reason we won that was because they bussed in another team from another county that was in the same boat we were, figuring that at least one of us would walk away with a win before we left Pee Wee League.
That's awesome. That's all. What a good solutions. Like, one of these teams is just going to be super sad. The other one is going to be thrilled that they finally won a game. It's like a sick coin flip.
Well, it gives you some resilience, right? You learn how to keep trying and take it in the teeth and get up.
Yeah. So let me just tie this in for you, right?
Yeah.
So it was my inability to cope with my anger, which was a really crazy to me because I never thought I had an anger management problem.
Well, it sounds like you were managing the hell out of it.
Right. And so once I didn't have hockey anymore, I had to find other ways to manage it, or just never be angry, right? The solution was just don't be angry, right? Like, just anger's bad, and so it started to
don't feel anything else either, right?
Right. A lot of that too. So it was that work when, I was trying to learn how to cope with anger and tolerate anger, that I really discovered that I wanted to be a therapist, right? So it was that work of, not having a proper coping skill, right? Not having enough proper activities or outlets for my anger, and not being able to process it, right? Part of that is like the whole God, persecution, hell thing, right? Where I still felt essentially that anger was not an appropriate emotion to feel.
So do you identify as Catholic now, or do you consider yourself a recovering Catholic?
Actually, I'm a Buddhist. I mean,
like jump ship hard.
Yeah. When I got into mindfulness and John Kabat Zen, I started reading a lot of Buddhist texts and a lot of readings, and it just resonated with me.
Nice.
So I was happy for that. But my kids still go to church. Like, my kids going to CCD on Sundays.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a debate that I have to continue with my wife.
Yeah. It's always funny. It comes into the office every now and then, is that debate on religion and how much and what kind of role it plays with kids. And there's good and there's bad, right? It all, as far as I can tell, being like, church was not part of my life growing up. If you woke my parents up on a Sunday before 11 o'clock, the cops had better be at the door, and they were twice. so, but as far as I can tell, it's all dependent on the community and the leader. Because I've met Catholic priests that I enjoy working with that have been profound for my clients. I've met any number of Christians. I work a lot actually with the Unitarian and Jewish communities out here. And it seems so hit and miss from the outside. Was that like kind of where it missed for you at some point?
It did, but for me, it was more because I felt like the Catholic Church, the people who, and some of them were awesome. I mean, I could tell you the story about weeping the first day of school in Catholic school and having a nun who was like the sweetest, kindest human being I've ever met, like take me under her wing and bring me into her classroom. And right. So some of the people I was
good
with were amazing people.
Right.
And my Catholic education was pretty good. But the hypocrisy, and the flat out, it's just, I can't stand the cover-ups but they were propagating it. Not only were they covering it up, but they were actually
propagating the kids getting hurt. You're going to notice a break right here in the conversation, and that's because Chris's son came down to say hi to his dad and interrupted our conversation a little bit. It was an adorable kid, said hi to me, warmed up my day, and made us both notice that a 5-minute segment of this story wasn't going to be the appropriate venue to keep exploring Chris's process with the church and how it's impacted the lives of so many Catholics out in Boston. So we may come back to this at another point, but right now we're going to go ahead and put this down and pick back up with Chris's story. So it's interesting to me. So your father was a man of his generation, was a man who worked hard and did what most fathers know how to do with their sons, is they get around them by having an activity they do together.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
And he did that, and it was wonderful for you two. It was great. And it was the one tool he had to help you manage that anger that all men kind of get put on them.
And so along with being such a great guy, I also had a nickname for him. I feel bad. He's not like he's going to listen to this anyway, but yeah, you never know, right? Yeah. I say that about my own podcast. I'm telling you, he hasn't heard my podcast. Anyway, but I called him the emotional black hole because there was like, he wasn't cold. My dad's a very warm guy. He's a very friendly guy. But like when it came to sadness or grief or anger or like
right by all that.
Yeah. He's very like, kind of Irish, I mean, at the end of the day, right? He's kind of that, oh, you're just, boy, just back up and,
have a drink and relax.
Yeah, tomorrow's going to be raining and it'll be a better day, even though it's raining. Right? Just very, and his dad was a, kind of a stone cold prick. So, like, I get it, right?
So you see that he improved, right? Like he
exactly. He did way better than his father. His father was, not a good father. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's always the struggle with most of the men I work with, and I'm positive that you see this in your practice with the guys, is that we have to talk about what our fathers didn't teach us at best. And that's not to say that our fathers were bad men. It's not to say that they were horrible people. They taught us what they knew. And there's a lot of reasons, and I'm probably going to do a podcast on kind of the history of how we got here. But your dad sounds like a great guy overall, who recovered from amazing things and raised a son who he can be proud of. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're doing too bad. Oh, wait, there's a brother that's doing all right too. Faint.
2.
Crushing it.
So no, he so I was always afraid to take him off that pedestal and kind of say, well, he was emotionally unavailable. But now that I know like what that means, and having worked with people who are emotionally unavailable or have struggled with people who are emotionally unavailable, I'm like, oh, well, he was emotionally unavailable because his dad was, and his mom. See, I was lucky. My dad was a little bit, kind of emotionally shut down at times, but my mom, woo,
She was big
yeah,
emotions.
she's big emotions, big emotions. So,
Yeah.
so I got
You're like,
kind
how
of,
do I cruise the middle of that?
yeah,
How do
right.
I?
That's pretty much my story. It's like, how do I navigate this middle? And right, that's where mindfulness comes in,
Yeah, that's
right?
it. Mindfulness
Keeping
is
me
all about getting in the
balanced,
middle.
right? And again, I'm not saying it's like the cure all for everybody, but find something that helps you find your balance. Find
Yeah,
something that helps you find your balance.
every day. Yeah, that's basically what I like. That's what I incorporate it as. This isn't to make you happy. This isn't to make you better. It's how to find a neutral. And it's a lot easier to jump from anything else that you want to go to from neutral than it is from amazing levels of anxiety and stress or big depression or anger. Once you get to neutral, then you've got space to check in and go with the emotion that's going to serve you. And I think that's where my work has really turned in the last year, both personally and in the practice, is getting our clients and our peers to recognize the use of the emotion and to get where they want to go. Like for the last month, the big analogies I've gone with is if our thoughts are the map, our emotions are our compass. Like,
I
and
like that. Yeah.
you can find it with just the map, right? Like you can wander
Right, right.
around and get there, but if you got the compass, you know the route.
Exactly. Yeah. And you could get there. Maybe not, maybe you don't even want to get there quickly, but you can
Yeah.
get there efficiently, maybe. Right?
Yes, exactly. You can at least not get turned around and go backwards.
The word I use is content. I don't like to use, I use emotion words, happy, sad,
Sure.
but
Happiness is not
my
a state of
neutral,
being.
exactly, right? My neutral is content. I said, let's find content, because you can be content to be anything, right? You can be content to be sad. You can be content to be happy. You can be content to sit on your butt. You can be content to be playing a sport. That, to me, speaks of a place from which we can experience everything. So, Dan Siegel calls it the hub of knowing.
Yeah.
It's like what we know, and from there we can then, right. No, let's not get into a whole discussion about attachment theory and
Yeah. That's
right, and being able
another
to go
time.
out and
Another
come
time.
back and go out and come back.
Another time, right? Oh man. So your story sounds like a lot of men of our generation, right? Like our dads were the first dads to change diapers.
I don't think my dad did.
That's fair. My
I'm
dad,
pretty sure he didn't. He wasn't changing my kids' diapers. I'll tell you that much.
my dad changed my brother's diapers. He did not change mine. And the only reason he had to step up for mine was because my mother went off the rails. But it was kind of an interesting thing. His generation were the first guys where some men more and more were doing work with kids and being around them. And they did the best they could.
They had
Right?
no experience, right? I mean,
And no
imagine
model.
being thrown, right, and just being thrown into it with. I had a client today describing being, trained at a new job on the cash register, and she's like, basically, the woman put me in front of a cash register and said, ring those people in line. It's like trial by fire. Right?
There you go.
It's the same thing, right? It's like, here's a baby. Here's a living
Good luck.
thing. Don't let it die. Good luck. That's what you feel like. By the way, I have 2 kids, and the day you go to the hospital, especially with the first one, it's like, take this, don't let it die. Oh my God. Yeah. Really? Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how many nieces you have, doesn't matter how many, friends you have who have kids. When someone hands you a life, you're like, oh.
Wait, this is on me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh wow, that's responsibility. Although my wife's cousin said that he felt more responsibility and more adult when he walked out of Home Depot with a chainsaw. I was like, oh, that's legit, especially from a dude perspective. That's legit.
That's respect for the chainsaw. I mostly just act like a giddy kid with a toy. I think his way is probably better. Oh man. Well, so we've had a really wonderfully rambling kind of conversation through it all. What of everything that we've talked about, if there's one thing that you want the listeners to take away from our discussion, what would it be?
With a lot of my, especially my kind of failure to launch young adult type clients, I'm always like, sometimes it takes a little while.
Yeah.
Because I was always thought of, as a late bloomer. And I was 100% a late bloomer, and I believe in late bloomerism. And so do something in the meantime to gain some experience and figure out what you want to do. Don't just sit there and play video games. No offense to video games, but right, don't just sit there and play video games. Get out and experience the world and figure out what it is that you want to do, whatever it is you want to do.
Go try some things.
Right. Just get out. That's what CBT, behavioral activation, is. Go out and try some things and then come back. If it sucks, come back and tell me it sucks. If it's amazing, come back and tell me it's amazing. If it loses its luster after a few times, tell me that too. But if you're not, and here's why anxiety is such a huge problem. Because what does anxiety do? Keeps you from wanting to go do things.
Right.
So that's like what my takeaway is. Don't stop going out and trying stuff or retrying stuff, because again, you're not the same person you were when I said you're not the same person you were. Right.
Yeah, just so, right? We always change, and having that check-in point is going to be important. And I love that. Just get out and do something. Like,
right.
Figure out what sucks, figure out what is enjoyable. And the other thing is, and just to add a caveat to that, there is very rarely a job that every aspect of that job sucks.
Exactly. Or the opposite, right? Like,
Exactly.
being a therapist is kind of like my dream job, and I think I'm kind of built for it. And there are aspects of it that I could do without.
What do you mean you don't like writing treatment plans? That's weird.
We could have a whole podcast about how much it sucks to write notes.
Yeah, the endless battle of paperwork. All right, Chris. Well, where can people find you?
So if you are, in the local area and Connecticut, you can reach out to Griffin Counseling Services if you need help. You can find Griffin Counseling Services at Griffin Counseling Services CT on the internet, and I'm on there as well. So if you want to check out what I'm doing, or if you are interested in coaching services or mindfulness training, that's what I've been moving into recently.
Nice.
And you can check out my podcast if you like. It's called Mindful Matters, and it's pretty much in every outlet. I talk about mindfulness issues of all varying sorts with experts and educators, and from a lot of different perspectives. I'm trying to figure out how to get through every perspective. So, and I'm hoping to have Tim on there very soon.
Yeah, this is going to be a swap, folks. So if you liked hearing from Chris and you just need a little bit more of my voice, bounce over and we'll be talking about mindfulness over on Chris's podcast. Well, thanks a bunch for coming on, man. It really has been a good time. I feel like if we weren't a half a country away, we would be eating lunch once a month.
Right. We'd probably be in a Starbucks somewhere, right? Spilling coffee and figuring out how to take over the region, or maybe the planet. I don't know.
It'd be fun, man. So thanks for coming on. Everybody, the show notes, as always, will be there. Have a great day.
It's been a pleasure.
Not my most graceful closing of an episode. As promised, Chris was informative, fun, and I hope the break in conversation wasn't too jarring for you. Thank you so much for bringing us into your world. Thank you for sharing this time with me and hearing these stories. I hope, as always, that in hearing them, it lets you avoid some mistakes in your life and maybe go find whole new ones. If you liked this episode or any others, please think of a friend that might enjoy them as well, and take a minute and share one of these episodes with them. I'm always looking to grow the community. I want to make sure these stories get out there and have the biggest impact possible. And I know that if you like them, people in your life will. So if you've got the time, take action. Share these things. Let us know what you think. As always, find us on Facebook at empowered.change.ce, or go to my website, www.empoweredchangece.com. I'm always looking for feedback to improve these. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening.